Hello, everybody. This is Jason, the curator of comics. I am back here for a new episode of Comics Corner. I apologize for the delay. However, I was too busy having fun this past weekend. Last weekend, actually, to be more specific, at Anime Milwaukee. It was a great time and had a lot of fun. So I won't dwell on that. However, I will instead get to today's episode. It's going to be a twofold type of episode. First, I wanted to talk about something that's been making waves recently in the terms of the news. One of the new Marvel Cinematic movies, Venom. I personally would like to say that while I'm not against Tom Hardy playing a role in Venom, and I'm not against the Venom movie per se on the whole, I will say that Venom as a character, I don't really know how they're going to spin this because unlike say the Punisher, where you could say that he has the noble intentions of like ridding crime while also just happening to be, a psychotic murderer in many regards. Venom, on the other hand, is a guy who is possessed by an alien bug in many respects, and as a result, he becomes evil. Now, you could say that the man underneath the Venom costume isn't always necessarily evil, especially with the way one of the more recent Venom series actually went down. Venom Knight actually had him playing a relatively good guy character, but I think that at the same time, the whole idea of Venom as a character is just really, one kind of best left to a villain. I don't think that you should, bring him into the hero or the anti-hero role unless you're really convinced that it's going to work. Like it's going to have to be a really good script, a really good setup for this to work out like they want it to, and it not to be, like contrived or at the very least, not come across as trying too hard to make him a cool anti-hero badass, because you've already got one in Deadpool in Marvel, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. You don't need to try and turn Venom into an anti-hero in order to make your universe more diverse, in terms of the cinematic universe. However, I will say, like I said, that it's just, kind of going to be interesting to see how that whole thing turns out. I personally am very, very anxious to see what it will turn out to be. So, if nothing else, it's got me intrigued. But I'm also not necessarily going to say, oh, yeah, I've got to go see Venom the movie because, it's going to be so much better than everything Marvel has done on its own. It probably is going to be maybe middle of the pack at best. It would have to be really, really good, like outstandingly good for it to even stand out in like maybe the top 5 for most Marvel fans. And that's including your Spider-Man fans and people who actually think Venom can work as an anti-hero. My only other hope is that they do not start by bringing Carnage into this mess too, because I mean, if you want to make Carnage a Spider-Man villain, that's fine, but if you want to turn Carnage into an anti-hero like Venom, you're going to need an even better script than you will for Venom, because, well, let's just say, whereas Venom possesses, the symbiote possesses a regular guy, the Carnage symbiote possesses a mass murderer, a serial killer. So, yeah, to make that whole thing sympathetic, you're going to need a lot of writing and a lot of good writing to make that work, if that's indeed the direction you're planning on spinning this Marvel, but I doubt it very, very much. Anyways, the real topic of today's episode is a couple months ago, I finished reading Extreme Justice, a DC comic series that started in the 1990s, believe it or not, because, well, with a name like Extreme Justice, of course it started in the 1990s. It was a DC comic book of, as one might imagine, and a spin-off of the Justice League. Now, it was originally created in 1994 and then went into syndication for about a year and a half, ending in July of 1996. It had 19 total issues, and although it was created with an initial unified vision of Dan Vado and Mark Campos, eventually, as you'll learn, the whole thing kind of starts to fall apart with this whole thing. Namely, in addition to being a 90s book with a very generic name and the 90s art style problems that often came with these types of books, well, let's just say they couldn't keep a consistent writing team or artists to save their entire lives, which is really kind of annoying to say the least. But is Extreme Justice as bad as I'm making it out to be? Well, I'm not really going to go into each and every single issue in great detail, but I will tell you what I thought of it. Now, the idea was, at the time, to create Extreme Justice and basically have it replace the defunct Justice League International, which also had its own name as Justice League Europe. Yes, there were a lot of Justice League books back in the day. Now, Justice League International did have its own fair share of core audience members, but being the 90s, they decided to offer a bit of a shake-up and decided to take characters who were not necessarily B-list in their entirety, but at the same time did in fact, have some degree of appeal to the DC universe and kind of create their own little spin-off book. The team Extreme Justice was led by Captain Atom, a character who, in my opinion, is one of the more underrated and underutilized DC Universe characters. Honestly, if you really want to read a good Captain Atom story, read Captain Atom Armageddon. As I'm kind of going to explain, you're probably not going to like this, especially considering how many curveballs they try to throw with Captain Atom going forward with the story, as I'll explain. The team also consists of a quote-unquote reformed Superman villain named Maxima, who was a woman who basically had psychokinetic powers, and so as a result, you can kind of sort of, understand why maybe she would be on the team, especially as, like I said, she decided to become a reformed villain. She also kind of shares a very similar story to Superman in that she's like an alien of a dying race, but it's very briefly only hinted at. And it's really not hinted at her backstory, I should say, throughout the entirety of the book. It's really something that kind of requires more background knowledge than I'm honestly willing to give, because, after all, Extreme Justice didn't last long enough to give us half of the satisfying conclusions that it intended anyways. The Blue Beetle, aka Ted Kord's version of the Blue Beetle. At this point, Ted Kord had kind of been relegated to a comedy character in many ways, for better and worse. He was definitely far more serious and definitely more on his game in Extreme Justice, but you could kind of tell that the writers themselves maybe didn't really have a whole great idea of what they wanted to do with Ted Kord as the Blue Beetle, because they also had to bring in Booster Gold and his terrible 90s armor outfit and basically, try to make the two stick together, even though really they're the only reason that they're probably sticking together is probably to kind of give it a little bit more of a well-rounded cast, considering that they came from Justice League International at the time. And the Amazing Man, Will Everett III, which basically the Amazing Man is, I don't even know how to describe him. First of all, he's got one of the weirdest, well, not weirdest, one of the silliest hero names ever. Seriously, Amazing Man, could you get more generic? His powers are kind of cool, I guess. He can absorb energy and matter, and basically, as a result, can channel said energy and matter into, well, his own attacks, which is kind of impressive. The team is later joined by Ronnie Raymond, aka Firestorm, Plastique, aka a former villain of both the Flash as well as Captain Atom himself, and the Wonder Twins, who you may remember from the Super Friends cartoon more than anything else of recent memory. Carol Ferris, aka Star Sapphire, a Green Lantern villain, also appears as the quote-unquote administrator for their Mount Thunder facility because, well, they're the Justice League and they can't have the Batcave or the Justice League satellites, so they kind of have to have their own base. In fact, the first 4 or 5 issues of the series is all about them going into this secret government base to basically try and take it over for their JLA headquarters, or their Justice League Extreme Justice headquarters. Actually, it's kind of worth mentioning that, the name Extreme Justice is stupid, but at least the writers probably had enough common sense to not have the characters refer to themselves as Extreme Justice. In fact, they're referred to almost exclusively as the Justice League throughout the entire thing that is this story. In fact, in many regards, when confronted with the fact that where the rest of the Justice League teams are, yeah, it's pretty much kind of established that they're all kind of scattered, which is really just kind of silly at this point, because, like I said, it just kind of was there. Again, they're not really acknowledged as Justice League of America or Extreme Justice, but they're kind of there to solve the problems that, you'd expect JLA to handle. It's actually even more bizarre when it becomes almost all about Captain Atom either fighting the government or fighting one of his villains that you really honestly don't want to see back, but at this point, I guess it makes some degree of sense, only it kind of doesn't. It's a plot twist in and of itself that I kind of will explain later on, but let's first just continue with the name. Like I said, the name, Extreme Justice. Like, really, who in their 1990s-esque, boardroom executive making decisions thought that this name was catchy? Like, I get it. It was the 1990s. A lot of cheesy names, a lot of cheesy and bad, might I add, artwork was thrown around at this time, but at the same time, you have to hold some degree of standard here with this. You have to at least pretend that you're trying not to sound over cool and just sound lame as a result. Anyways, I digress. The artwork throughout most of it, like I said, since there was no consistent artist, the tone of the art was kind of all over the place. Now, don't get me wrong, the art style itself remained kind of the same overall, the coloring and everything like that, but you can kind of tell when certain artists jump in, when certain artists jump out. Kind of similar to the writing and how, the series is almost divided into a series of mini arcs, and as a result, it's never really able to get a single coherent plot stream going. The most you'll get in terms of a coherent plot that overarches throughout Extreme Justice mostly actually revolves around Captain Atom. First and foremost, it revolves around Captain Atom, quote-unquote, returning from a alternate timeline in a quantum dimension, a plot device that would actually be reused in Captain Atom Armageddon to much greater effect, as well as the return of Monarch. Oh joy! For those of you who don't know who Monarch is, he was initially supposed to be the main villain of the DC Universe that was supposed to conquer it in an event called Armageddon 2001. Captain Atom was originally slated to be said villain, to be the hero that turned into Monarch, and basically take over the world as a tyrannical despot. However, much to the surprise of DC, as well as I'm sure many other people who were, comic industry veterans at the time, the turn was actually leaked, and this was before the internet, mind you. It was in 1991. So, yeah, the turn was somehow leaked, and DC therefore had to change their plans and basically turn Hawk into Monarch. Well, that went about as well as you would expect, and therefore killed whatever momentum Armageddon 2001 would have in the memories and annals of comic book history, so they attempted to turn Captain Atom into Monarch a couple of years later, and this is kind of the result. In fact, it's even insinuated that Captain Atom, the one that, we follow in Extreme Justice, is in fact somehow a quantum clone of Nathaniel Atom, the real name of Captain Atom, and that Monarch is in fact the real Captain Atom, the real Nathaniel Atom, rather. Yeah, I know. It didn't really make a whole lot of sense either. It was kind of just a plot twist for the sake of a plot twist to explain how there could be a Captain Atom and a Monarch on in the same continuity and in the same timeline. It doesn't make that much more sense either when they tried to bring him back in Countdown either, when they had to put quote unquote Captain Atom into where they had to put Captain Atom into the Monarch armor to contain his suit, even though they theoretically could have put him in just about anything that could have held his powers back. And yeah, I'm thinking about Countdown to Infinite or Countdown to Final Crisis again, and that just made my head hurt. Anyways, basically, that's kind of the big plot twist. Monarch shows up out of nowhere with a cult of Monarch, for lack of a better term, which happens to basically be trying to help various people and denizens in the midst of one of the great disasters of DC. I believe it was Zero Hour, if I'm remembering correctly, is the event comic that the fallout of the Extreme Justice and many other of these books kind of deal with in their fallout. But I really honestly don't know if that's accurate or not, so feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Kindly, of course, but you get what I'm trying to say. The other major storyline also happens to involve Captain Atom, and basically involves him getting engaged to Plastique, who reformed herself and renounced her villainous ways. Namely, she just stopped using her powers, and that's really kind of how it worked. And then, get married to Captain Atom. Unfortunately, the marriage didn't last, and it's kind of revealed that by Captain Atom Armageddon, the two basically just split up because their political and ideological differences were too much to reconcile, which I call bull on, because in Extreme Justice, Plastique's not only supporting Captain Atom emotionally, but she seems more than willing to turn over a new leaf. And I think a lot of this just kind of has to do with the fact that a lot of the characters after the series, in particular Captain Atom, just kind of drifted into the ether with no real, storyline all to themselves as solo characters, and were basically just kind of pushed back into the Justice League once they realized their mistake that they had made and the Justice League of America had returned in earnest, shortly thereafter. And basically the rest of the other characters involved really don't do all that much to distinguish themselves. Oh, don't get me wrong, there's actually quite a couple of interesting storylines, including the Blue Beetle following up on trying to get his reputation back in order as a tech expert after Cord Industries fell apart on him, which is its own long story that I don't really think that I can get into without doing it some degree of injustice. Then you've got Booster Gold, who ends up getting his armor damaged somewhere in the early stages of the series, to the point where he becomes desperate enough to actually ask Monarch to repair him, and to repair his suit and his body, because, well, without his armor, even though it's in a bit of a damaged state, Booster Gold would essentially collapse because he's just, a husk inside the armor. So, yeah, that's kind of depressing. But all's well that ends well when they actually manage to free Booster Gold from Monarch's control because, well, Monarch is in fact a villain, even though he's doing a lot of benevolent things. And basically, they manage to save him by creating some new armor. And basically, none of this is really brought up again because shortly after this, at least to my knowledge, Booster Gold's the art style and armor style for Booster Gold kind of reverted more to what it's known or the more common form that you see today as a result. And basically, like a lot of the other art design decisions of the 90s, is kind of left it better in the 90s when, they tried to make these over-muscled, gritty characters in their own weird way. Ronnie Raymond basically only shows up to continue a feud with Captain Atom because, well, there was in fact a time where Firestorm and Captain Atom were fighting each other, and the fact that, well, in particular because Firestorm just doesn't really like the fact that Captain Atom works for the government for the most part. But hey, that's not really important in the main scheme of things, as Firestorm's big arc is really more or less focused on the fact that he's become an alcoholic after he survived. Well, I should say he became an alcoholic after he survived a cancer which actually was going to kill him, in fact, leukemia, only to have Professor Stein, who had left him and therefore the Firestorm Matrix suit behind to save his life and therefore give him back his Firestorm powers. Yeah, I know, comics, they're convoluted, am I right? Meanwhile, Maxima and Amazing Man, they don't really do much in the story to actually develop and flesh out their characters. Really, Maxima just kind of plays the old idea of, I am an alien trying to understand and comprehend what it's like to be friends with the humans, or the metahumans in this case, while Amazing Man is basically just trying to figure out how to be a hero in, the whole idea of being a fish out of water kind of thing. So, yeah, basically nothing creatively amazing about him is being done, and it's not even like the whole Amazing Man lineage is even referenced in any great degree, so it's not like this had to be a new Amazing Man to begin with. Could have just been the last Amazing Man for all we knew. Basically, the only other character development that Maxima and Amazing Man get is that they develop into a bit of a romantic relationship, which fell apart as soon as Extreme Justice ended because they were secondary characters in the DC universe outside of Extreme Justice, so therefore there was no real need, at least the writers felt, to continue the romance subplot that built between the two towards the very end. The Wonder Twins kind of show up just the hell out of nowhere and really don't do much in the way of anything. They don't even really fight. The only real plot development that they have is apparently their race of beings, their alien race rather, is apparently been enslaved, and they call upon Extreme Justice to help fight back against their enslavement, and as a result, Extreme Justice become exalted as heroes to the people that were to the Wonder Twins' entire alien race, and basically then the Wonder Twins decide to join them. But again, because the series was cut short and because the Wonder Twins were introduced like 3/4 into the series, they didn't really get the plot development that was necessary to make Zan and Jaina, the Wonder Twins' real names, actual characters. Carol Ferris also gets her own fair share of character development, but she also manages to get it in the weirdest way possible. You see, she'd been fighting back against the Star Sapphire component of her personality to the point where she actually managed to, repress it from within. However, some way, somehow, she got pregnant by a alien demon thing that I really honestly can't even remember what in the heck it was. But yeah, apparently she's pregnant with some sort of god baby, and spends a lot of Plastique's bachelorette party attempting to fight off Star Sapphire and regain control of her own life so that she doesn't, give birth to this, meta-human baby. Somehow, some way, Carol Ferris manages to win the inner strength test of will, pretty much banishing Star Sapphire, who goes off to give birth to the extra-dimensional baby thing, which, to my knowledge, again, wasn't really expanded upon, which is just great. It doesn't really, at least not immediately after Extreme Justice ended. And yeah, that's pretty much kind of some of the main plot points of Extreme Justice. You can kind of tell how this thing kind of bips and bops all over the place. It starts out good enough for me personally, with them trying to come together as a team and get a base of operations. They go doing it by fighting essentially a bunch of Decepticons, or government robots rather, and a cartoonishly evil government dude who, for no real reason, is really invested in protecting the abandoned Mount Thunder bunker, to the point where he also actually kills his subordinates for wanting to leave said bunker that, for the most part, again, with the exception of him and his research, has been abandoned by the government. This guy is a rogue operative whose name was not even worth committing to memory because, he goes out in the typical villain fashion of saying, I'll die before I let you have my secret base, and lo and behold, they oblige him of that. Granted, it's mostly because he hits the self-destruct button is activated, and therefore it leaves Extreme Justice there to kind of, well, collect the wreckage before they can turn it into their base, but that's essentially it, really. There isn't really even a whole lot else to the whole idea of getting the base at Mount Thunder other than Carol Ferris acting as a liaison to basically help them rebuild, and also so that they can get actual, weapons and tech and intel so that they're not completely working against the government, and therefore they, are actually a legitimate superhero team. Basically, that's kind of all there really is to that opening story arc, and then from there, it just kind of zips around all over the place. Like I said, some of the plot elements are, fantastical in the good old superhero comics way that actually kind of draws you in. But for the most part, in my opinion, the fact that the writing staff changed hands at least 3 times by my account, and the art staff changed hands by about 3 times again, if give or take maybe 1 or 2, again by my count, meant that this book was kind of doomed after its first 4 or 5 issues when the first artist and writing change fully began to take effect. And it's not like this book could have been bad, or rather I should say it had to be bad. The book in and of itself on the whole isn't terrible, and I actually kind of like it from the perspective that it gives a lot of characters that don't necessarily get their own solo titles in DC nowadays, which is very, very disappointing, might I add, especially with Captain Atom. I mean, there's a lot of stories to tell with the guy, especially considering his own complicated backstory, and the most he's gotten is Captain Atom Armageddon being crammed into crap tie-ins for Countdown, as well as being pushed into Final Crisis as kind of a secondary antagonist for really no reason other than to say, hey, there's another major villain. Ooh, look out. Something else big and mysterious might happen towards the end of Final Crisis, to the point where I think Monarch, aka Captain Atom, just said, screw you guys, I'm going home, and basically wasn't really seen very much at all until the DC Rebirth, where he was kind of relaunched a little bit. He was given his own title, thankfully, but really he hasn't been given anything substantial since Captain Atom Armageddon in terms of individual character storylines, which just kind of makes me sad because, like I said, he's one of my favorites in the DC universe because he doesn't get the spotlight and because, well, I think his powers are kind of cool. The whole atomic thing is just kind of really cool to me. It always has been. The rest of the characters, like I said, either just kind of faded into obscurity or were just kind of relegated to the background once again. Not to say that Booster Gold and Blue Beetle didn't do anything of note towards the late end of the 90s or anything like that and into the new millennium. In fact, they're probably the ones that got the best, treatment after Extreme Justice, all things considered. Firestorm was kind of there, too. I mean, you'd have to really kind of be a fan of Firestorm on the whole to really know what he was up to. But like I said, Amazing Man and Maxima just kind of faded into obscurity, and, well, I really don't think that that was necessarily a bad thing because they just didn't really connect with me. Maxima as a villain was definitely interesting. From what little I read of her backstory about her feud with Superman, in particular, the fact that her reason to fight Superman was so that she could make him submit to giving her the heir to, well, her own people's future, essentially. Yes, you are hearing that correctly. Basically, Maxima was trying to force Superman to have a kid so that she could eventually, have an offspring strong enough to take over the universe / stabilize her own alien race, which has kind of fallen apart by the time she basically, is in with Extreme Justice. The art style really is probably the biggest problem with the whole book. it's just kind of an eyesore to look at the art nowadays. Don't get me wrong, it's not the worst art job from the 1990s I've ever seen. There are definitely much, much worse. But for those of you who don't know your comic book meme, a lot of the characters in this book are definitely suffering from Young's blood disease, which is a phrase that describes characters from the 1990s having simply no pupils or irises to their eyes, just blank white voids, aids with not even really anything else to distinguish said white voids. Blank eyeballs, rather. Don't get me wrong, if the character calls for that sort of, thing as a theme of their character, that can be kind of cool, but back in the 90s, it was just kind of lazy, and it cropped up way too much for it to simply be a coincidence, especially in Extreme Justice. It didn't happen in every issue or every panel, but you could definitely tell that some corners were being cut, especially when they were trying to get this thing out on the monthly, which is probably the main reason why the art team and the staff and the writing changes felt so jarring. Despite the letters to the editors actually showing that there was a great deal of fan interest in Extreme Justice, especially for the time in the 90s when, comic books popularity was kind of waning due to the speculator boom and just general decline of, like I mentioned, art quality at the very least, if not overall writing quality. Well, let's just say that, it's kind of disappointing that so many of these types of bumps in the road had to happen, leading to so many of these changes, because it really kind of crippled what had potential to be an interesting series. And had the artists been able to stick around and add their own unique flair other than the generic, very over-muscled, very gray and kind of washed out look to the book, which was kind of just the standard for the 90s to be, over-muscled and just gigantic proportions that just generally didn't look as great as the stuff that came before or would follow it. Well, yeah, I'm sorry, but Extreme Justice, as a result, fell flat in kind of that aspect, and as a result, it's not kind of hard to see why it tanked after 19 issues, only for the series to kind of be merged into Justice League International. It's not like the team completely died off. They did have their own little story where they'd fight a group ironically called the Extremists shortly thereafter. But at the same time, it's not like they lived up to the potential that the book initially seemed poised for in terms of creating a new team. And ironically, while the art style probably didn't help the whole book stand out because it again copied that very, very bad art from the 90s style, I think the real disappointing thing that actually prevents Extreme Justice from being anything short of just okay, not memorable in many regards at all, unless you're a fan of Captain Atom like me. In that case, it's kind of memorable because it's, sort of still in continuity, and it also reflects a lot of, intriguing elements to his character and makes him feel more fleshed out as an actual person, as opposed to some of the other books that he's kind of sort of had to star in, where he shares merely the role of the lead, if not, is just the lead, but in name only, rather. But, unless you're somebody like that who enjoys, Captain Atom, or heck, if you're a fan of Blue Beetle or Booster Gold, I could say that there's at least something for you here in the later issues. But for the most part, yeah, there's not really a whole lot in terms of the overall characterization to get behind. And in many regards, it honestly comes back to the fact that the name of the book is Extreme Justice. You cannot get any more 1990s than that, and as a result, you probably could not date the book any more than they did with that name. I mean, seriously, even if the book ran, like, say, 40-plus issues and concluded most of its initial storylines, or it kept a series of, consistent writers and artists, the fact of the matter is it was never going to survive past the millennium. After everybody in the 90s grew so sick of hearing verbiages like extreme and radical and awesome and totally tubular, dude, or things of that nature, basically the comics equivalent of trying too hard with both the art and the characters to make them seem more badass and more personable than they actually were from time to time. I mean, it's not really the writer's fault, but I will say whoever edited the book and allowed the idea of extreme justice to be the name for this book, to go through and go to print, well, they probably should be shaking their head and be thankful if they still work for the industry that they were actually able to get away with it at the time. But yeah, that's just my brief thoughts on Extreme Justice, the entire run. I have all 19 issues, 18 regular issues, plus the initial issue 0 that it came out with. And like I said, I was able to actually get them for a decent price. I wouldn't say that I spent maybe more than $20 on the entire set. In fact, I'd probably say I spent maybe closer to 15, maybe even a little less than that, paying for the entire thing. So I say that if you can find it for that price, and if what I talked about in terms of the characters and the characterization intrigued you a little bit, then, maybe you might want to read it. Otherwise, you're not missing a whole hell of a lot if you skip it. In fact, it's probably one of the many books from the 1990s that DC did that you could honestly skip, and you're not missing anything at all. Even though, ironically, it did actually have a bit of impact on continuity and direct tie-in to the main universe continuity, which is probably the most bizarre thing of the whole, on the whole, as is. If anything else, it is in fact part of the DC continuity, or at least it was until both the New 52 and Rebirth effectively wiped away a lot of the slate from the past DC universe, which I both love and hate. And I could go into that, but that would leave me rambling for about another hour or so. And I kind of just want to wrap it up with Extreme Justice. But yeah, like I said, since there's no trade paperback for this book, if you want, you're going to have to read it through probably the individual issues or an ebook, which, I don't know, maybe it's available on DC All Access or DC Online. You could find it, I'm sure. But like I said, since the book didn't do very well, and since it's, a book from the 90s where a lot of these books were overprinted to the point where the value of the books actually kind of went down because of this, the speculator boom. It's probably not hard to find these, and probably not hard to find them, like I said, for a cheap price. The whole set probably shouldn't cost you more than $10 to $15 if you're lucky, and individual issue hunting. But regardless, I'd like to thank you all for joining me here on Comics Corner. Be sure to leave a like, subscribe, and of course, hope you enjoyed the video. And the next time I'll be coming at you, hopefully will be within the week instead of, actual 2 weeks that I ended up waiting for because of, Anime Milwaukee and a bunch of other factors that contributed in with that. And hopefully the next time you hear from me will not only be within the week, but it will be Comics Corner News, CCN. But until then, again, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. And I am Jason the Curator. I am signing off.